students are gone, but you are still here. And we know how you feel because you are done. But you have so much work to do to get ready for tomorrow. Good afternoon, podcast listeners everywhere. Welcome to After the Bell, a Stunt Brothers production. A podcast that gets inside the life of a teacher and provides a wellness guide for being prepared to take on this most challenging of professions. I'm Martin Stuvel.
And I'm Roy Hunt. And we share your pain, having taught a combined 70 years. The guarantee of this podcast is to make you laugh, make you think, and give you at least one little nugget that you can use in the classroom. So get out your marking, organize your supplies, or just pour yourself a coffee.
I want something stronger.
And listen, engage, and interact with After the Bell, a podcast for you, the hard-working, dedicated teacher who wants free lesson plans, free advice, and a free meal.
Okay, Roy, but I'm not paying for anything more than McDonald's. Hey, Mr. Hunt, how are you today?
I'm fine, Mr. Stubel, and how are you?
I'm just great, and this is episode number 5.
Number 5, and we're still talking to each other.
We still are, right? We're in this studio here, we're close quarters, and we are still friends.
Yes, we're locked in a box, talking to each other, and we can't leave until we finish.
No, we can't.
Yes.
And, you're listening to this now, so we've gone live in 25, which is the year 2025. We started releasing these in January, but we actually recorded these starting in October, November of 2024. So sometimes we'll talk about certain weather issues. And I know in 2024, when we were recording, we had atmospheric rivers.
We had a cyclone bomb off the coast of Vancouver Island.
Else, right? So hopefully by the time you start listening to this in January, February now, it isn't quite that level, but then again, maybe it's been the snowstorm of the year, of the century.
Snowmageddon, right? A snowmageddon.
So who knows what you're dealing with?
Who knows what's going to happen?
But I've been in the garden, right?
Yes, and you're still in the garden.
I will not,
even
with the weather, even with the bomb cyclones and the atmospheric rivers, I get out there. In fact, there were still some hot red peppers to be harvested in my greenhouse.
Amazing.
Yes.
So you spend an awful lot of time in your garden.
I do.
In my mind, you enjoy it because those vegetables don't talk back.
No, they don't.
And what is your what's your leadership style like in the garden?
I'm the dictator. The supreme leader.
The supreme leader.
I like to think that in my mind, but the weeds actually like to take over and they put me in my place.
There you go.
But it is that leadership kind of moment where you're kind of feeling like you're in control, but then weather and other things, they certainly give you a run for your money.
That's right. Well, I'm thinking, this is a good time to think about our golden nugget.
Yeah. Well, before we do that, usually we come up with a theme.
Yes. Well, the golden nugget, the theme for the golden nugget, I believe, should be leadership. And how do you build leadership in your classroom for your students?
Yeah, and I think the theme of today's episode will be leadership.
Leadership.
And we'll touch upon our guest, and that's a certain type of leadership. And we're going to have another guest from another area of the education world. We can be leaders in many different ways, but we also want our students to become leaders.
Right. And being able to facilitate opportunities for students to take leadership is really important. We need good leaders.
More than ever.
And I think, yes, more than ever. And there are fewer and fewer people who stand up to say, I'd like to be a leader.
Looking around the world, right? I think we see different types of leadership.
Different leadership styles, yes.
And I think it's important in our world, in our education world, to impart good leadership skills, right?
Yes.
And people need to feel comfortable that they have the opportunity to do that in their classroom.
And by exposing our students to opportunities for them to take low-level leadership skills, to build on the experience of leadership, to understand what leadership is about, as we give them more and more opportunities, we help to solidify their idea of leadership, but also give them the experiences so that they can understand what the role of leadership really is.
And that's why the theme of today's episode, number 5, is leadership. And that sound that's the nugget sound.
Okay, that's the nugget sound.
I know you're always so eager.
I love the nugget.
Get that hand in there and pull out the golden nugget.
The golden nugget.
But the gold nugget is when we think about our own teaching practice and something we can then provide to teachers to say, this is a little something you can do and use in your classroom and take
That's
away.
correct.
And then we'll
Yes.
put it on the website, stuntbrothers.ca, and then hear back from listeners some of their suggestions and ideas.
Yes, I would love to know what other teachers do to facilitate leadership in their class.
I agree. So how would you describe our gold nugget today, what we're focusing on?
In our golden nugget, we have a common thread of practice that we've used with our students, and we both did classroom meetings.
I think we both did it daily in the morning
Yes.
chat idea. And why did you enjoy doing the morning chat?
Well, what I enjoyed about it is the students would come in, we would circle up in the chairs, and it was an opportunity for them to listen to others. And we tried to build in the opportunity for everyone to be able to speak. And
Be a leader, right?
To be a leader.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the idea of the morning chat to start the day because I found for all of us, rather than jump right into the math lesson or the science lesson, it was just a nice way for everyone to feel comfortable. I could get a temperature reading on everyone and figure out, social, emotional, where I could connect with students. And we all could kind of have this really relaxed moment to learn about each other and then provide some leadership opportunities.
Yes.
It kind of opened the door to what leadership could be in a presentation with their peers that wasn't overwhelming. So the morning chat was a real chance to provide small little bits of leadership nuggets to fit the theme of this segment to the students in the class. Roy, how did you do morning chat with your students?
The students would volunteer, or I would choose if I couldn't get volunteers. They'd choose to take on roles within the meeting. In my class, we had the reviewer.
Okay.
And so if you took on the role of the reviewer, you could review, based out of 10, a movie, a book that you read, a meal that your mother made or your father made. Then we also had another role called the fact of the day, where the student would read a fact of the day to the class.
Right.
And then we had last comic standing, and the person who was the last comic standing would tell a joke or a riddle to the class. The fourth role that we had was hello, goodbye, and they would teach the class how to say hello, good, or goodbye in another language. So it was an opportunity for each student to have something to say, for the class to listen, and for us just to show respect for the listener.
Right.
It's for us to show respect to the person who is talking.
Right.
And for the rest of us to sit back and listen.
That's why I find it fascinating and why we work so well together, because as you described this, I did very similar things, right? I did the morning chat and had very similar roles. And for example, we had meteorologists. We, instead of last comic standing, we'd have the joker, right? And they would either tell a joke to the class or a riddle. It could be a math riddle or some interesting riddle at that point. We had something called lie detector. And that was where they would give 5 facts. It could be about themselves or on a certain topic, like an animal or space. 4 of the facts would be true and 1 would not be true.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, and then the
Yeah,
class
that's a
would
good
have to
one.
guess who thinks this is true, who thinks it's false, and at the end they would reveal which one was made up. We also did a good morning class in a different language, so it was a great way of learning a new language every day and then saying goodbye with that language. So, Roy, it sounds like you and I have very similar style in the way we started the day and bringing this morning chat or class meeting into the morning to promote leadership in our class.
Yes. And so the way of using the morning meeting for opportunities for leadership.
Very low level, but it's sometimes those small little steps that help bring leadership. We sometimes make these things much bigger than they need to be, and it becomes overwhelming. How do I teach leadership? Sometimes if you just take little baby steps with your class, those that weren't feeling so comfortable did one little thing, and then they can go on to something larger.
Many of the students in our class have had opportunities for leadership, usually through sports when they're on a team, or maybe they're the captain of a team.
Right.
But not all students have that experience.
No.
And so by providing opportunities for everybody, it's a skill that you can hone, that you can get better at. And for those students who haven't provided opportunities or being provided opportunities, or for those students who shy away from those opportunities, we need to, as gently as possible, kind of nudge them in that direction to experience that leadership, because when they experience in an environment where it's safe, where it's controlled for the amount of leadership that they get, they might like it.
And my experience is that some of the best leaders that I've discovered weren't the ones that presented themselves as leaders on day one. There are those students that come in and they're clearly the leaders in the class. But some of the quieter ones, when you give them this chance, they turn out to be great leaders.
They recognize that leadership can feel good.
Yeah.
And
they just weren't given the opportunity, right?
They need the opportunity, and then they recognize that they do have leadership skills. So the golden nugget for today, take your classroom meeting, create roles within that classroom meeting, and provide opportunities for leadership for your students.
And we will post all these roles onto our website, stuntbrothers.ca, and we'll list this example, and then you can use those. Or,
I would love to know what the teachers or our listeners out there, what do they do to promote leadership in their classroom? What activities do you think is a golden nugget? What's that sound?
What's that sound? And there's the sound. That's the homework board.
The
sound.
Homework board, the best part of the day.
I know. I get a little nervous. But did you always get your homework done, Roy?
Well, you see, I'm enthusiastic about the homework board, but I'm more enthusiastic about field trips.
Yeah, so hopefully it's something like that on the homework board today, because we've been talking about leadership, right?
Yes.
And when you hear leadership, what do you think it is?
Well, if you're thinking at the school, the leadership is sort of the microscopic level.
Right.
You've got what's happening in your classroom with your students. You've got the teacher with the student. You have the staff within the school. You have your administration.
Yeah.
You even have leadership within your special resources teachers, or LSTs, and your EAs. So there's a variety of levels. And
it's all powerful. Like, I think that some of the best leadership in the school are just the teachers, what they do in their class. You don't need to necessarily have a title to consider yourself a leader.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. And then from the school, then you can go on to, where could you go on to?
Well, there's certainly the union leadership plays a very important role.
You know a lot about that, don't you?
I certainly do. And then trustees. And that's why it was great to have that visit with Colville Man last week.
Yes.
Right? And that was an example to learn about that connection of leadership. Let's have a look at the homework board and see what we got on there, because I think it might be a field trip, and that will make you very happy.
It is a field trip, I know, but if you look a little closer, who do you see there?
We got Pius Ryan, who's the superintendent in North Vancouver in British Columbia, Canada. North Van is one of the larger school districts with 16,000 students.
16,000 students.
Pius Ryan is the superintendent, and we're going to go see him.
We're going to see him.
We are. We are.
So how did we do this? Because,
you just ask.
You just ask?
You just ask.
So it's funny how that happens,
right?
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Did you ask? No.
We're actually having Pius come into our box.
Come into the box.
Come into the box, into the studio. And it's kind of a good day for it because we've been having a lot of snow.
Yes. And we predicted not long ago that there would be a snowmaggedon coming.
Because the first part of this episode we actually have done in the studio a few months ago, looking forward to this moment when Pius would come in, and then Monday we would broadcast this on February 10th, I guess.
Okay.
But it has snowed a lot. It
has snowed. And in fact, Monday of this week, we had a snow day.
We did.
The schools in North Vancouver and West Vancouver were shut down for the day, and everyone was outside playing. It was pretty awesome.
So I guess, when you predict the weather, we need to listen.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
So we'll wait, and we'll have our interview with Pius. Really looking forward to this.
I can't wait for it.
So here we are. We call this The Box, our studio here. And we have Dr. Pius Ryan with us, and we're really looking forward to this conversation. Now, we always start off with a bit of an icebreaker.
Oof.
Just quick little things.
Go for it.
Just to see how it goes. And whatever pops into your mind, Just say
Okay,
first thing.
that could be scary, but let's see. Let's see what happens.
Okay. Recess or lunch?
Recess.
Apple or banana?
Oof. Banana.
Socials or science?
Oh, socials.
Okay. What was your favorite book as a child?
Ooh, interesting. Ironically, I have an English degree, but I didn't read a lot as a child. Misspent childhood, but the favorite book and the first book I probably really read was Moonfleet by William Faulkner.
If you could have only one piece of music that you had to listen to for the rest of your life, you don't have to play it over and over again. You can play it when you want, but you only get one piece of music. What would it be?
Wow. I guess, I'm sure this answer to this question happened to be different every time you ask it. But I was speaking to someone yesterday about guitar players, and so I would say Telegraph Road by Dire Straits.
Yes.
Because it's just a brilliant tune.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So,
have you seen the Dylan film?
I have.
I'm going tonight.
Yeah, I'm not a moviegoer at all, and my wife figured I needed to get out of the house on this weekend, so she brought me to the movie, and it was
I heard good
it's
things.
it's
really
good.
good things, too.
It's good. Yeah, they did a good job.
Okay.
Who was your favorite teacher growing up, and why?
Oh gosh, I'm sure many of my teachers thought I was a pain. Miss Abbott comes to mind. She's my grade 5 teacher, and she was an excellent teacher. She made me they used chalk at the time, the good technology, and she made me write out the verses of the Bible many times. But she was a lovely, caring, but yet firm teacher.
Okay, great. I have a bonus one. Here we go. A little surprise. Newfoundland time or Pacific time? It's always, listen to CBC. It was always like, and 9:30 in Newfoundland.
Yeah, half an hour later. Well, I've been in BC an awful long time, but I do love the notion. There's a song about Newfoundland that it talks about took God, as it's like 6 days to create the world, and he spent a half an hour singularly on Newfoundland. So let's just put that out there. Okay.
Okay. Here we go. So, as I said, our theme for this episode is leadership.
Yeah.
What have you learned about leadership in your journey to become a superintendent in a school district with 16,000 students? Maybe tell us a little bit about your journey from Newfoundland to North Vancouver.
Sure. Because I think of literally and figuratively the journey from Newfoundland, like that's a long ways from here. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the same thing as the journey to being in the role of a superintendent in a school district. I think, what have I learned? Boy, I think it's a journey of self-discovery, really, like this path that you take. And you can't really – I don't know if you make sense of it until you get to a certain age and you look back and you go, oh, well, that led me to that, which led me to that, which led me to that. And I think probably what I've learned through it all – and I can get into some specifics of what that journey was, but was really – it's a journey, I think, like any social practitioner who goes from a novice to an expert. I think of Martin, I've been in your classroom, right? I know what that looks like, and I know what the expertise looks like. I think we start all of this stuff at a very intuitive level. We care, we're community-oriented, we love children, like we're drawn to supporting people. Right. We can't help ourselves. And then you move through different phases and different experiences where you start to actually know what you're doing. And you know what you're doing. You move from this place of you just wanted to help and make things better to going, hey, when I do that, that's what the outcome is.
It's quite liberating because you suddenly go, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it
now
is.
I know, right? You're not just trying to be somebody else or watching what someone else does down the hall. Or we all have that imposter syndrome too, right? So when you get to that point, it is. Yeah.
Well, and I don't think good people, my experience is the imposter syndrome never leaves because you have a good day and you have a bad day and you think, geez, like they're going to find out today that.
Exactly.
But that journey, it's really revelatory, and I think there's things now that I know, and I know what the reaction of other people will be, and you're building, I don't know if this is the right word for it, but and again, I equate it very much like classrooms, you've got a group of individuals that you're cultivating a community in. So you really are shepherding, and you're learning how to shepherd, if that's appropriate to say. Hopefully with the good values. So that's what I've learned. if you want, sort of that particular, it's like, I guess for me personally, I was always drawn, like I think anybody that comes in and stays in education is almost vocationally, like how do you care for others? So I went to we had a denominational school system, so it wasn't rich or poor, it just was what it was. Right. And so I ended up going to my high school was Gonzaga. It was an all-boys sort of Jesuit high school, but it was we weren't rich people, or it was everybody, and but volunteerism was a big part of it. And from a very early age, I volunteered at the Children's Hospital with children who were on what's called the psychiatric ward at the time, as well as the CNIB. But anyway, psychiatric ward had the biggest impact on me, and that's why I learned that I was good with others that were struggling, and that's what I wanted to do. And so anyway, that journey took me through education, and then I came to BC, and that took me into teaching, and then I wanted to be a counselor, but then I found out about school psychology, so I became a school psychologist, and then I learned a lot about systems and how to support not just an individual, but if we now support those that are doing the work with individuals, more can happen. Anyway, and then I ended up in Sea to Sky, and had a really amazing journey there, and for 8 years. And then I went to Surrey as a director for curriculum and transitioned to support services and got to do some amazing things with amazing people. And thankfully, I was naive enough that I could just do it without worrying about ego and stuff.
That's often the key, right?
It's often the key. Like
bit,
I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right?
Yeah, you just do it, and and with that though, of course, you learn and grow, and then ultimately having the opportunity to come to North Van, and I think as we were chatting before this started around that idea of school development and how do you support a system in that way culturally. Anyway, I won't go too far in that because you guys don't need to hear all that stuff.
Fantastic.
So are there any values or outlooks on life that from your upbringing in Newfoundland that you bring that inform your approach for work?
That's an awesome question. It really is. I think. So this may sound odd, right? So I'm always drawn to people who have sayings. My mom was a famous for having sayings, crazy sayings, these Irish things that come from nowhere. But a big saying in Newfoundland, and this ties in, is don't get too big in your way. Okay? Now what that means, if you were, hopefully you've been to Newfoundland. If not, I'd encourage you to go. But people in Newfoundland, they don't really care what you do. And in fact, if you want to impress upon them what you do, you might find yourself on the outside of a group. Because generally speaking, it's not about that, right? We all get to make our different roles. We get to make different decisions, but you're not valued for that, at least. So don't get too big in your way. It's a value statement. It always is in my head, and it keeps me very much like, I guess humble. Like some people think of different roles you need to act in. Anyway, so I think that's a big one. But the other one that's linked to it is community, and it's more of I grew up in a time when the outports were very much alive and well. There was lots of small, but both my parents are from a little place called St. Vincent's in St. Mary's Bay. And it's a community with, I think its max might have been 1,200 people, but when they were leaving, it was probably maybe less than, 500. And now there's, very few people there because the inshore fishery sort of died away. But that notion of you are all, and maybe that's why don't get too big in your way was a saying, because that's antithetical to being in community, right? If you see yourself as above the community, well, you're not part of the community. So those two things, I think, they're just ensconced in my DNA. Like yeah.
I could see that. Like when my kids were young, I bought a Westphalia. I took a leave, and we went across Canada for 3 months.
Okay.
And the best part of the trip was the 3 weeks in Newfoundland, and just right away, like I've never been in a place where no matter where you were, someone would come and tell you a story.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And include you in the conversation and just tell you about how the cod industry used to be or whatever it was at that moment. Sure. And it was 3 weeks. It was September at that time, and it was beautiful sunshine. It was the best weather, right? Yep. It was not what you hear about Newfoundland.
Well, September and October are our best months. Yeah. Halfway through October, then it gets iffy. Yeah. And it's not uncommon to be in an outport at that time. And if somebody was stopped in the middle of the road having a conversation with somebody, you might as well just wait. Because they could be there for I can't speak to the now. I've been gone a long time culturally. I do go back, but it was a wonderful place to have grown up.
I have the same thing. I come from southwestern Ontario, from a farming community.
Oh, yeah.
So we band together. But on the Sundays when you go for a drive, there'll be 2 farmers in the car in front of you, and you know they're going about somewhere between 10 to 20 kilometers and looking at the crops.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah. And you just drive the same speed.
Just relax. It's okay.
Okay, just to change direction a bit.
Yeah.
Is there someone in your life who had the biggest impact on you and your journey?
Yeah, it's funny, right? Like I said, you can reflect back on things. It's hard for me to say one person. I mean, you can always do that, but I think there's been a handful of people that have given me different things, and of course, all kinds of people who give you little things that help you grow. I always go to sort of my mom and my dad. They're different people, but my dad would have been someone who would have helped anybody, but he also understood that people weren't looking to change. Right, so he would, if you looking for guidance or support, he'd be more than happy to go out of his way that. But also recognizing that most people in life really want to tell you their troubles, but they don't really want that. And my mom was, she's my mom was an amazing teacher, and just a beautiful person in that way. And so that was her way of being or thinking about others was, again, a big feature. But I had two other people. Like I worked with a guy in Sea to Sky in my first sort of venture into leadership. And I can remember trying to write a message, and I was trying to be all smart and, fancy words. And he leaned over my shoulder and he'd say, "Pius, what is it you want to say?" So I tell him what I want to say. He said, "Well, just say it."
Yes.
Right? But it's a magical thing, really. And then the biggest influence probably on how I think or helped iron sharpens iron would have been a gentleman named Rick Ryan. He retired now. He was last at the deputy superintendent in Richmond. But we were directors together in Surrey. And that was really interesting having you often don't get a partner to work with close like that. And we would do nerdy kinds of things. Like we made a commitment to read all of these historic works and talk about them from a perspective of what does this mean for leadership. Like we read The Praise of Folly by Erasmus, of course Plato's Republic, Machiavellian's Mediations by Marcus Aurelius. From the perspective, we used to get frustrated, and it's great having a partner like this because they really strengthen you, like you two.
Yes.
but it's we would be always frustrated with the flavor of the day. Like everybody wrote a new book or another thing happened, and everybody in education was like, "Hang on now, like there's been great thinkers in the past. How do we?" Anyway, it's interesting.
Bring him back.
Yeah, he was a very wise guy, and come back to very simple things. But yeah.
Okay. So, what do you see as your greatest achievement?
Greatest achievement. I've been very fortunate. I remember watching a pop singer one time, and the interviewer was asking him about luck. He was very lucky, and he said, "I'm not lucky." He said, "It's hard work and opportunity coming together, right? I mean, then we call it luck." But I've had a number of things I think have changed how people do their work. I mean, I don't know. Like I was the president of BC Case for like 11 years, and so I guess I had to have an influence there. So the work I've done in Surrey around the whole LST and working with that was, I think, really good work because it helps shape and frame how people think about the work, right? And that all has a cascading effect. But probably the biggest thing I'm probably most proud of at that through my career was the development of the Welcome Centre in Surrey. That was the first Welcome Centre in the country at a time when Surrey was expanding by 10,000 residents a year. I don't know where it is right now, but it was magical work, and I got to do everything from literally finding the site right across from the Superstore in King George to building a conception of how you support people. And you guys have heard this, right? Universal targeting intensive. It became a mantra very young for me because people were coming and they were very different. We would have Karen refugees who needed to learn how to use like indoor plumbing to people who just needed a license. So I really felt it was revolutionary and again made a difference in so many people's lives. But then I think of the opportunities with North Van and like I don't know, it was still early days, I guess, but that building of how do we look at ourselves, like school planning, that process to me was really important. And I know, Martin, you were part of that, but that conversation...
And you really brought a different angle to it, I think, when you started that up.
Yeah, well, the whole concept of what makes a good school, and we have agency, and it's not a principal's responsibility, or it's ours. And now, cultivating that with the limited time that people have and the business of their jobs, anyway, that's a lot. But I guess I'm proud of being able to participate in all that, and all the good people that were part of that stuff.
And for that school planning, I like the way you simplified it to that. And sometimes we get too big with things that are so complicated, we forget what do we really want to know here. Yeah. And that kind of leads to my next question in terms of this complex world we're now facing with so many issues. What qualities do you think we need in leadership, whether it's at the school level or international level?
Yeah.
take it as you will, but what are we looking for?
I think that's a great question. And I think there's leadership especially in public schooling. There's so many levels to leadership, right? And everybody has a responsibility in leading other human beings towards a better future, right? So number one, I think people need to think that way, right? I think the two thinkers that come to mind is Margaret Wheatley, who talks about her last book was called Who Do We Wish to Be? I'd recommend it. And then a man named Thomas Friedman, and both comment on community. And anyway, I'll come back to that in a second. To me, the two biggest qualities, one, systemic thinking. And what I mean by that is leaders need to understand that everything you do has a ripple effect to the other thing you do. So from the moment you walk through the door or don't walk through the door, how you include people, how you say hello to people, even if you're having a bad day, all of these little things are not little things. They're all connected. And so to be able to So from a leader's perspective, be able to see that, not everybody can see that. And I think if you pay attention to it, you start to see more of it. You see how the threads are woven together into a tapestry, right? So that's one. And the second one is a real appreciation for building community. Like you are responsible for a community of people. This is not about you. And again, I would say that's at every level of our system.
And don't you think that's the foundation? Like you got to start with that. You could have the biggest ideas in the world that on paper look amazing, but if you don't talk about those connections and building that community, it will fall apart.
To what end, right? It's a people enterprise, and I guess linked to that, it's not about you, right? And that sometimes that maturity. If you come into leadership, if you come into work, and you think I'm going to be X. Like generally speaking, maybe some people get there, but like most of my experience have been people don't come in with that as my goal is they come in and they just do good work, and then all of a sudden they're doing this work, and then anyway,
it snowballs.
One hopes, right? But those would be the two biggest qualities, and they're equally complex, right? Because if you think about that notion of systems understanding or thinking, well, ultimately that is community. Right? So if you think about the health of the community, there's so many things that are linked to that health of that community. And for you to keep that in your mind or to learn and grow with it from sort of a novice to more of an expert, right? It's wonderful. Mm-hmm. But I mean, again, right? You think of your journey from novice to
Okay. Well, leadership can be challenging and stressful.
Yeah.
So what do you do to find calm?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. It's funny. It's changed throughout my career. In this role now, I have to be really mindful of staying well, because it is very stressful. So like simple things like I really can't drink very much or any of that kind of stuff. I have to make sure I get to bed. I can't watch TV at certain times. It's just because it's very consuming. And if you do that, you just start to fall apart. I think. Even anxiety-wise, because there's so many things. But I do a couple of things during work. So from when school's in session, it's full on, right? As you know. So, but I do get up early and I read. Generally speaking, I read for about 15 minutes every day in the morning, and it settles my ADHD brain. But it also gives me a calm that I've done something for me, and then I can give over my day. Right, I've done that. Now everyone else can have my day, and it has other benefits. And then on the weekends, I'm really, I guess, I turn into an introvert. Like my wife is doing a leadership role now, and it's been interesting because she starts to understand like all of the stresses and things from the week. You really just need solitude. Yeah. And as my kids are getting older, I'm finding more space for that. And I'll go to my kids. My youngest guy is 15, so I'll go to his games, and that's like That's beautiful. When I'm not in session, I play music. Like I'm a guitar player, and I play a lot of different
I was going to
instruments.
ask because I know you play guitar, if that was a way you could find calm too.
It's hard. I noodle a little bit because there's always a guitar around, but it's when I get time off. It's like, I imagine what that future, utopian world looks like when I'm retired, where we're after in the summertime about probably about 4 weeks in, I start playing a lot, and then I play so much, it's a wonderful thing.
I'm only now, because I've always dabbled with guitar, but now that I've had retirement, my wife bought me a Morgan guitar for retirement. He's actually a North Van guy that makes these wonderful guitars.
Yeah, I'm more for
He's made one for Neil Young and Sarah McLachlan, so I'm feeling the calluses on my fingers because I'm getting to it now, and it's a good feeling.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it.
Thinking about leadership and thinking of the world, and what do you think is the greatest challenge facing leaders today?
Yeah, I think we talked about it a little bit already. I do think there's a great analysis done by a man named Manuel Castells. He wrote a book called The Rise of the Network Society. It's a few years back now, but was very prescient, right? It spoke to the future. And there's a new book now, Nexus, by another gentleman it's quite good. But Manuel Castells is insightful because he spoke about this network society, right? How interconnected we all become, while at the same time, people are very discomforted by that, right? As a human being, we were brought up in little villages, sort of thing. And so our sense of self gets fragmented. And so what happens is the natural reaction to that in society is fundamentalism. Right? Because this is too amorphous for me, so I need to find my group. And that's the group. So we're going to make, you see it, right, in the politics of the world, make America great at the expense of, so I think the biggest challenge for leaders, and again, I guess it depends what people conceive leadership to be, right? But if I believe leadership is about building our communities and supporting the human beings, then I think the biggest challenge is that politicization and the fundamentalist thinking without a real deep concern. Because once you line up with a certain more fundamentalist perspective or binary perspective, you stop caring about that diversity. You stop caring about people's needs and the damage you can do. And I guess I find that concerning, and I think leaders at every level, what I wish for them to be able to do is recognize that and act differently.
I think, and it goes back to something you said earlier about the connections and community. I think we're losing community, and even because it was recently a snowy day here in North Vancouver.
That's right. I heard about that.
Yeah, but it was amazing because I went out and it was a community again in a way you don't see other times of the year because everyone's inside their house or on their devices. Everybody was out, and the smiles you saw, and it felt like going back to another time. And I'm not saying I'm not trying to be like Trump, and you got to go back to some good old days because there's a lot of things we've moved on from, and they're positive. Sure. But in terms of community and people finding solace in that, I think we've lost that, and that I just noticed it on the faces of everyone.
Yeah, I think it's a great observation because I think. This is the tension, right? And this is part of the leadership thing. We North America in particular, we have such an individualistic notion of success and then this drive. And we see it really in North Vancouver because, of course, we're an upper middle class community and kids don't play in their neighborhoods anymore. They're all in sports and there's all these academies and there's all these – and everybody feels like they can't waste any time. And living is almost like a waste of time, right? So a snow day, I think it's fascinating psychologically that it's almost mythological, right? It gives kids and gives adults this notion of, I've got to go out but what a beautiful thing, right? And so I do worry about that. I worry about this whole urbanization and densification that we're experiencing. And one, I do think that makes public schooling even more important in regards to the work that we do, because nobody builds community like we do. While at the same time, I'm concerned about what does this look like if we're not doing that work. Like I mentioned earlier about Thomas Friedman wrote a book called, you can see I read every morning, right? So it comes out, right? It's kind of a nerdy thing. My friends from back east would be like, oh, God, whatever happened to him? But he talked about a time in the 70s in Minnesota where if you track back in time, a lot of the leaders in the United States through the 90s and stuff came from this small town in Minnesota. And then he did an analysis of, I always think of there's blue zones in the world where people live longer. Well, I want to, envision, could there be green zones? Like there can be places, Margaret Wheatley talks about this too, there can be places like North Vancouver, right, separated by bridges from other parts, where it could be just a really beautiful community to be in. Yeah. But it's the constant slog because most people have been, maybe brought up or inculcated in different views from different places, and I hear from them sometimes where it's very individualistic versus how are we really talking about each other on a Friday night when people are sitting around having a glass of wine or a non-alcoholic beverage, and they're talking about their community and their experience with schooling. Where are they with that? Because I know most of the parents' experience with children in our school is excellent.
Yes.
But of course, we all know where people will tend to go are stories that are more, so we all have a responsibility. Like every community member in here, if you want to live in a great community and want your kids to thrive, social generative experiences, you have a role. Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't know. That's what I would hope to, get in people's heads.
It's those things where I know as a classroom teacher, you go on in that solitary environment, but when you have those parents who come by and say, I just want to say, my son or my daughter talks more about school this year than they ever have before.
Isn't that great?
Right. And it's great because you continue to work that process. Yeah. Right. And then you want the feedback. I said, I think I'm doing well, but what do other people think about it? When we start sharing those ideas in a positive sense, it really helps push things forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's wonderful.
How can you instill leadership to individuals in our district?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Again, back to this whole notion of being a systems person, right? I mean, that's probably a fancy word for it. But you think about every conversation that you have. Like, how many kids have you influenced where you can't even remember, but you said something to them and they took that away, right? So I do think there's a part of this which is literally every conversation you have an opportunity to instill a sense of belonging and a way of thinking about the world, right? So that's small. But I guess I'm in that position where we get to select who are going to be the formal leaders of schools, right? And so what are the values that we want to instill in people? We've done a lot of work this last couple of years on what we call compassionate systems leadership, right? So how do you show up and understand systems and space, et cetera? I think there's a myriad of things, but I also think, I'm a big fan of connecting people across schools, right? So we started and more seriously this year a network learning community in our family of schools with intermediate teachers and primary teachers, where teachers from different schools within that family come together, minimum of 4 times a year, to talk about a focus on practice. But I think that's another example of you're building community. Like, as you know, like when you talk to a colleague, and especially if it's a colleague who's outside of your culture, of your school, and you're talking about practice, it removes all that power dynamics, and you can actually build relationships in that. So I think there's a myriad of things, right, that you can do. I think of our dinner and dialogue around school planning. And again, there's still always work to be done, but how do you bring people to a genuine space of a democratic conversation about, right? What are the things because, my experience is that if you ask people for example, what is a good school, or what's a good person, or what does it mean to be educated, you're going to get
it's all over.
It's all over the map.
Right? Yeah. But with that, you end up coming down. If you can distill it, you'll get down to a few things, right? And that's the beautiful thing, because everybody starts going, oh, so we're not on the wrong. We're on similar pages. We actually agree.
Yes.
Let's go.
It's the values.
Yeah.
Are there certain things, and you've probably touched on it a bit, but in terms of the leadership you're looking for in the district with VPs, directors, principals, superintendents, assistant superintendents, that you're looking for in the next generation as they come in, dealing with this world that we've talked about, maybe lacking community? What do you look for in that kind of person?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's a handful of things. you look for people who I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but I would say sometimes like a dog on a bone, right? You look for people who every day when they come to work, they're trying to hit a home run. Like, you know what I mean? Like they just every day. It's like they
might miss.
They might miss, but they can't help themselves. It's like, no, I'm gonna, and so they're constantly in that cycle of trying to make things better, right? So that's I guess a disposition or a quality that they just keep showing up, and this is who they are. But then the two other things I do think about is like, where is their value system? Like, what do they value, right? And you need to be able to be principled and be able to articulate what you do value, so you're not shifting with the winds because individuals have very different views where the community could be. So then there's that. With that, there's that maturity of and people come at different stages, right? Have intuitive to intentional, how to develop community. Like, what are the intentional things that you can do that, right? And even some of the successful people I've seen don't necessarily have to be too strategic. They just need to be, present in the playground, talking to the parents, talking to the teachers, going around, getting to know people. Like, you can be successful doing that, but then take it to our hope would be take it to the next level, right? And then, of course, instill in our good people that cascading effect where each one of our people who manages a classroom community, they're building a community. And that community links to the room next door, which links to the school, which links to, and that, Roy, you were sharing, like you're TOCing a little bit right now, and you can tell right away when you walk into a school.
You get the feel.
You get the feel, right? Yeah. You just know it, right?
And I like it because I'll go into a staff room and I'm carrying a different lens now.
Yeah, for sure.
Than the classroom teachers there, and I can actually hear things differently because I have that different lens.
Yeah.
I'm allowing myself to hear things differently.
Yeah.
And it's I love this district, and I love going into those staff rooms, and I love going to those schools.
Yeah. No, we've great people.
Yeah, they're amazing people. What is the biggest risk that you have taken?
Jeez. I was going to make a joke. I think the biggest risk my wife took was marrying me. But no, I've moved, right? Like, there's a few ways of looking at that for me. One, like leaving Newfoundland as a cherub, right, as a 24-year-old boy into the big wide, like that's a big risk. It's a risk, yeah. And then I was getting really. I've been fortunate that. I've worked hard at different roles, and I remember when I moved to Langley to be a school psychologist at that time, and I really learned a lot, and I worked hard, and I think I was good. I was, people commented that I was helpful, but a job came up in Squamish, and me and my wife let's go, and so, and then of course I did the same thing when I left Squamish. I was on a path, arguably to potentially. I was a director when I left there. There was only 2 directors and a superintendent. So to go to Surrey, it was like from small to massive, and and then of course to come here. And coming here was probably the biggest one, to be honest, because as you go through your career, you build your credibility, right? You do things, and people are with you, and they. And every time you go somewhere new, like, they don't know you. They don't know what you did. Right. They don't care what you did. And all of a sudden, it's like you're like, but I'm pretty good. Like, I used to do this, and they don't. Now you got to start over again. And I found the more expertise you got, and the older you got, that was even harder because you were going right back to the beginning again, right? And then you had to continue over time. So. Yeah, I mean the professional challenges outside of that, like that's personal challenges, I guess, from a professional perspective. But some of the biggest risks have been hiring, being committed to hiring certain people that others felt differently about, right? And but seeing those qualities, and thankfully, in my view, being proven right by their good work. But those are risks, especially the higher up you go in an organization, because it becomes political, and people don't know the internal workings, and but they'll have very strong views from the outside, and you may go against that view, and that becomes risky.
When you talked about moving on and going to different places, it made me think like that's why I like to go to different schools and work at different places and do different jobs, because sometimes you wondered, everyone said, "Oh, yeah, you're doing a great job," but is it just because of your reputation? It became easy because everyone wants you to be, So you go somewhere new and you have to prove yourself again, and you realize, okay, good. No, it's working out here too.
Yes.
And I found that kind of reinforcing. It wasn't just some myth that developed.
Well, I think that's very astute, because I think for you personally, like it's personal, like you overcome that, and then I think when people do that, they tend to reflect on their practice more, because you think, am I crazy, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's cool.
I'm just going to take it globally for a second,
Okay.
and historically, because I think you like history as well. And looking back, is there any person or leader in history that you really admire and stands out for you?
That's interesting. History. Like it's hard to contextualize. I got two things come to mind. One, I do think Marcus Aurelius, and the reason because he wrote Meditations, right? And I mean, who knows what it would have been like to live under his rule. However, the idea that somebody who is like literally the most powerful person in the world thought about values and thought about temperance and thought about like that, to me is compelling. So that does come to mind. But I often think, I think about the book Good to Great. Okay, now if you haven't read it, it's sort of an analysis of companies that were, good and those that became great. But in it, he gives an example of study of leadership, and he mentions two people. He mentions Lee Iacocca, whom everybody knew about in the 80s because he wrote these books, but he also comments that Lee Iacocca drove Chrysler into the ground. Like he was from a perspective, a terrible organizational leader. Now, who am I to say? But this is what the book says. And then he commented on another gentleman, I believe it worked in a vacuum company or something like that, who year over year for 20 years was the top performing, and people loved working with him, and nobody could remember his name, and I can't remember his name either. And so, but it always stands out to me because you work, especially in certain roles. Some people think that you need to be flashy, you need to be out in front, you need to be whatever that is, and I really don't believe that in the sense that, of course, there's a time and a place, but it's more about all of those other pieces, right, and people doing the good work in a values-based organization. So, yeah, those things come to mind.
Okay.
Before we have one final one, but before that, is there, Roy, a final question we could do there? And then we'll end with the one about the nugget.
I have one, and I started out talking about it. We have a new school being developed here in North Vancouver.
Yes.
And because it's new, how will you approach it from a leadership point of view, being able to lay that foundation of creating a social environment that connects with the community to, you're going to open the door, and then how are you going to move forward on that day?
That's a great question, and I think I appreciate you asking it because it puts into light that opportunity, right? So we certainly have started talking because we're going to have to look at boundary changes and all that kind of stuff as the new community forms. But the mantra, the umbrella line that sort of we put over it, or I believe is important, is literally, in quotations, building a community, because that's what we're doing. So with that lens, we've got to think of all of the activities that can happen before the school opens, and then, of course, in the first couple of years of the school being opening, that is the end in mind. So I think it's a beautiful opportunity to back to the values that we've talked about. Mm-hmm. And so you take any number of things that in this conversation regarding to who we choose as the principal of the school, how staff are chosen, how staff are coming in with this mindset, right? That you are coming in, you're not just coming in to teach grade 5. You're coming in to build this community.
Yes.
You're not joining a community already in existence and you need to navigate. No. You have a real role here. I think it's super exciting. I would love to be a part of that as a staff person, and I think also too. I think again, these are details, and I'm sure people will have better thoughts than me. But I think anytime you build things, you have to be mindful of what's that continuum, right? So what's the continuum of really well-seasoned educators? What are some people who are starting in their career, mid-career? What's that balance so that you're really building hopefully a vibrant community. And then, of course, how do we build with our little ones and our parents coming in? And I think it's going to be super exciting. What an opportunity to hopefully, in their minds, create a vision of what a community is.
Yes. Yeah, to start it from the beginning, right? What a wonderful moment.
Yeah, it's super exciting.
So thank you. We always we have one final question,
Okay.
and in our podcast we always have one nugget that we kind of say this is a nugget you can use in your classroom. And you've presented many nuggets, Pius.
Okay.
And we really appreciate that. Is there, on the topic of leadership, is there one nugget you could say, think about this as we end our conversation? That is kind of how you put your view of leadership into one little golden nugget. What would it be?
Oh, good Lord. I don't know if I can do one.
Yeah, and maybe it's such a big topic that you just don't want to make it sound trite or
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes, that's the hardest thing. I think it's like parenting, and it's like a lot of things in our life. A friend of mine once said to me, "Relax, it's going to be okay."
Yeah.
And I when he first said it, I was like, how's that helpful? But to be honest, like so much of life, like we get worried about this, we're worried about that, and there's Kahneman talks about system 1 and system 2 thinking, and we're so algorithmically oriented that something happens and we react to it. So how do we relax and allow for give it time so your understandings come in? So probably that's probably the biggest piece of advice, but. The other nugget is it's like any other practice. It takes many years, and you'll never be there. I shared with principals at the beginning of the year a little story about Gary Cooper, the actor, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a notorious story that he was on his deathbed, and he says, it's a shame I'm dying. I'm just getting the hang of this thing, right? Yeah. I think we all feel like that, right?
That's what life is, right?
That's what life is, right?
Yeah.
So I guess.
Yeah, and that made me think of John Lennon had a quote saying, everything will be fine in the end, and if it's not fine, then it's not the end. Right?
Yeah. Yes, that's true. Unfortunately, true. Anyhow.
So thank you so much, Pius. It's been a real pleasure to have this conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
It's been amazing. I've learned lots, and it's nice just having this opportunity to sit across the table from you and just chat.
Yeah. It would be nice if we could do this on a regular basis with people, But this back to our earlier comment about a snow day, right? Like we're all so darn busy.
Yeah.
Yes.
And yet we get to create our own world in some respects. So I'm shocked at how we, as human beings, we keep getting technologies that are supposed to make our lives better, but we keep making it busier.
It's very ironic.
What's wrong with us?
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
And we all jump into it, and now I need this new app.
Yeah,
right?
there you go. Right?
Maybe just go outside and play in the snow.
Hey, perfect metaphor.
Play in the snow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I really enjoyed that interview with Pius.
That was such a comfortable conversation. I felt like that we shouldn't have been here in the recording studio, that we should have been sitting in my living room with drinks and just talking about our philosophies of education.
Yeah, and really,
he's such a comfortable person to talk to.
And really got to the heart of leadership, I thought, and brought his perspective to it. And I thought that was a really well done interview. So well done, Mr. Hunt.
Good job, Mr. Stubel.
There we go. Mutual Admiration Society.
Yes, there you go. That's a new club.
This podcast is organic, taking shape with each episode. Building resiliency for teachers everywhere.
That sounds great.
And our website is stuntbrothers.ca.
That's stuntbrothers.ca.
We will chat again
after the bell.